Alarms screamed and lights flashed as Jack Mitchell's spaceship careened through Asleel's turbulent atmosphere. "Mayday! Mayday!" Jack's voice was hoarse with panic, but the only response was static. He gripped the controls, wrestling with the unyielding force of gravity as the ground rushed up to meet him. The impact was bone-jarring. Metal twisted and cracked, and Jack was thrown against his restraints. Pain lanced through his shoulder, but he couldn't afford to focus on that now. He had to survive. With a grunt, he unbuckled himself and crawled out of the wreckage, squinting against the harsh light of Asleel's twin suns. The landscape before him was alien and unwelcoming. Jagged rocks jutted from the ground, and strange, bioluminescent plants glowed eerily in the shadows. Jack took a deep breath, the air sharp and unfamiliar in his lungs. His eyes scanned the area for any sign of danger, and he forced himself to move despite the pain. As he rummaged through the debris, looking for anything salvageable, a faint rustling caught his attention. He turned, heart pounding, to see a pair of wide, luminescent eyes watching him from the shadows. Jack froze, his instincts screaming caution. "Hello!" His voice was gentle, trying to mask his fear. "I'm not going to hurt you." The figure stepped forward, revealing a young alien girl, no more than 8 or 9 by human standards. Her skin glowed softly, and she clutched a piece of metal like a lifeline. Jack noticed the trembling in her limbs, the fear mirrored in her eyes. "Are you alone?" he asked, his tone softening further. The girl nodded, her gaze never leaving his face. "I'm Jack. What's your name?" "Lyra," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Jack crouched down, ignoring the protests of his injured shoulder. "Lyra, are you hurt?" She shook her head but didn't move any closer. Jack reached into his pack and pulled out a protein bar, unwrapping it slowly. "Here, you look hungry." Lyra hesitated, then inched forward, snatching the bar from his hand and retreating a few steps before devouring it. Jack watched her, a mix of relief and sadness washing over him. This planet was a war zone, and she was just a child caught in the aftermath. "We need to find shelter," he said, more to himself than to her. "It's not safe out here." He stood, wincing at the sharp pain that shot through his shoulder. Lyra's eyes widened with concern, and she took a tentative step toward him. Jack managed a reassuring smile. "I'll be fine. We just need to stick together." As they moved away from the crash site, Jack kept an eye on the sky, wary of any sign of danger. The journey was slow, each step a battle against the uneven terrain and his own injuries. Lyra stayed close, her presence a small comfort in the vast, alien landscape. They found refuge in a cave, hidden behind a curtain of bioluminescent vines. Jack collapsed against the cool stone wall, his body screaming for rest. Lyra sat beside him, silent but watchful. "Thank you," she said suddenly, her voice stronger now. Jack glanced at her, surprised. "For what?" "For helping me," she replied, her eyes sincere. "I was scared. Alone." He nodded, feeling a surge of protectiveness. "You're not alone anymore, Lyra. We'll get through this together." As night fell, the cave offered a small measure of safety, but Jack knew their journey was just beginning. The distant sound of explosions echoed through the air, a stark reminder of the dangers that lurked outside. He wrapped an arm around Lyra, his resolve hardening. "Rest now," he whispered. "Tomorrow we find a way out of here." Lyra nodded, her eyes closing as she leaned against him. Jack stared into the darkness, his mind racing with plans and possibilities. The bond he felt with Lyra was unexpected but undeniable, and he knew he would do whatever it took to protect her. The stars outside the cave twinkled like distant promises, and Jack clung to the hope they offered. This alien world was harsh and unforgiving, but it had also brought him something precious, a reason to fight and a reason to survive. The explosions drew closer, a grim reminder of the ever-present danger. Jack's eyes snapped open, his instincts on high alert. Lyra was already awake, her luminescent eyes reflecting the faint light filtering through the cave entrance. "We have to move," she urged, her voice steady but urgent. Jack nodded, forcing himself to stand despite the pain in his shoulder. They couldn't afford to stay in one place for long. "Stay close," he instructed, grabbing his makeshift pack. "We need to find safer ground." As they ventured out, the landscape seemed even more hostile. The air was thick with tension, every shadow a potential threat. Jack's mind raced with strategies to keep them safe. "Lyra?" he began, keeping his voice low. "Do you know a place where we can hide?" Lyra hesitated, then nodded. "There's an old sanctuary not far from here. It's hidden, safe." Jack's eyes flickered with hope. "Lead the way." They moved swiftly but cautiously, each step echoing the urgency of their situation. The ground beneath them was uneven, littered with remnants of past battles. Lyra navigated the terrain with surprising agility, her knowledge of the land evident. As they approached the sanctuary, Jack noticed a change in the air. Felt cooler, more serene. The entrance was concealed behind a thicket of bioluminescent vines, casting an otherworldly glow. Lyra parted the vines, revealing a narrow passage that led into darkness. Inside, the sanctuary was a stark contrast to the chaos outside. The walls were adorned with intricate carvings, telling stories of a time when Asliel was a thriving civilization. Jack marveled at the craftsmanship, his fingers tracing the patterns. "This place is incredible," he said softly, more to himself than to Lyra. Lyra's voice broke the reverie. "It was our home before the war. Now it's just a memory." Jack turned to her, sensing the weight of her words. "We'll make it right," he promised, his resolve strengthening. "But first, we need to stay hidden from Zoker." They found a small alcove deeper inside, where they could rest and plan their next move. Jack inspected his injuries, grimacing as he adjusted the makeshift bandage on his shoulder. Lyra watched him, concern etched on her face. "Let me help," she offered, reaching out with delicate hands. Jack hesitated, then nodded. "Thank you." Her touch was gentle, and Jack felt a surge of gratitude. "How did you survive out here alone?" Lyra's eyes darkened. "I hid, stayed away from the pirates. My parents, they told me to run when the attack started." Jack's heart ached for her. "You're incredibly brave, Lyra. We'll get through this together." She gave a small, determined nod. "We will." Suddenly, a noise echoed through the sanctuary. Jack tensed, motioning for silence. They listened, the air thick with anticipation. Footsteps, distant but approaching. Jack's mind raced. They needed a plan. "We can't fight them head-on," he whispered, "but we can outsmart them." Lyra's eyes gleamed with understanding. "There's a hidden chamber further in. We can trap them." Jack grinned, despite the situation. "Lead the way." They moved swiftly, navigating the ancient corridors with purpose. The hidden chamber was cleverly concealed, accessible only by a narrow passage. Once inside, Jack and Lyra worked quickly, using the remnants of the sanctuary's defenses to set a trap. As the footsteps grew louder, Jack felt a surge of adrenaline. This was their chance to turn the tide. He glanced at Lyra, her determination mirroring his own. "Ready?" he asked. Lyra nodded. "Ready." They waited in silence, hearts pounding, as Zoker's soldiers approached. The tension was palpable, every second stretching into eternity. Then, with a swift, coordinated effort, they sprang their trap, the ancient mechanisms clanking into action. The element of surprise was on their side. Zoker's soldiers, caught off guard, stumbled into the chamber, triggering the defenses. The walls closed in, trapping them effectively. Jack and Lyra emerged from their hiding spot, relief washing over them. They had bought themselves time, but they knew this was just the beginning. "Good work," Jack said, his voice tinged with both exhaustion and pride. Lyra smiled, a spark of hope in her eyes. "We did it." As they stood together in the hidden chamber, the sanctuary felt a little less like a relic of the past and more like a beacon of hope. Their journey was far from over, but they had taken the first step toward reclaiming their future. Jack's heart raced as they navigated the sanctuary's hidden corridors. The ancient walls whispered secrets of a bygone era, their intricate carvings casting eerie shadows. Lyra led the way, her familiarity with the sanctuary apparent in her confident steps. "We should be safe here for a while," Lyra said, her voice echoing softly. "This chamber was built to withstand attacks." Jack nodded, his eyes scanning the dimly lit room. "We need to figure out our next move. We can't stay hidden forever." Lyra sat down on a stone bench, her expression thoughtful. "The sanctuary holds more than just history. It has resources we can use: food, water, even some medical supplies." Relief washed over Jack. "That's a start. But we also need to repair my ship. It's our only way off this planet." Lyra looked at him, her eyes filled with determination. "There's an old workshop deeper in the sanctuary. It might have what we need." As they rested, Jack's mind churned with plans and contingencies. Every moment counted, and the threat of Zoker's return loomed over them like a dark cloud. He studied Lyra, marveling at her resilience. Despite her youth, she possessed a strength that inspired him. "Why do you trust me, Lyra?" Jack asked, breaking the silence. She looked up, her gaze steady. "Because you're different. You care. Most people here only think of themselves, but you risked your life for me." Jack felt a lump in his throat. "We're in this together. I won't abandon you." Their conversation was interrupted by a distant rumble. Jack's muscles tensed, and he exchanged a worried glance with Lyra. "We need to check it out," he said, standing up. They moved cautiously through the sanctuary, following the sound. It led them to a massive door partially ajar. Jack pushed it open, revealing a vast underground chamber filled with ancient machinery and tools. "This must be the workshop," Lyra whispered, her eyes wide with wonder. Jack approached a control panel, brushing off the dust. "If we can get this equipment running, we might just stand a chance." They worked together, reviving the long-dormant machines. Sparks flew as Jack repaired damaged circuits, his hands moving with practiced precision. Lyra assisted, her nimble fingers adept at handling the delicate components. Hours passed in a blur of activity. The workshop hummed to life, its lights flickering on one by one. Jack's heart lifted as he found the parts he needed for his spaceship. "We did it," he said, turning to Lyra with a triumphant smile. But their celebration was short-lived. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the workshop, growing louder by the second. Jack's blood ran cold. "They've found us." Lyra's face paled, but she stood firm. "We can't let them take us." Jack grabbed a wrench, his mind racing. "We need to create a diversion, something to slow them down." Together, they rigged a series of traps using the workshop's tools and materials. As the footsteps drew nearer, Jack and Lyra positioned themselves behind a stack of crates, their hearts pounding. The door burst open, and Zoker's soldiers poured into the room. Jack triggered the first trap, sending a cascade of metal beams crashing down, creating chaos. The soldiers shouted in confusion, giving Jack and Lyra a precious window of opportunity. "Now!" Jack whispered urgently. They slipped through a hidden passage, the sounds of the soldiers' struggles fading behind them. The narrow tunnel led them back to the main part of the sanctuary, where they could regroup. Breathless but determined, Jack turned to Lyra. "We need to move quickly. They won't be distracted for long." Lyra nodded, her resolve unshaken. "I know a way out. Follow me." They sprinted through the ancient halls, their footsteps echoing in unison. Jack's mind raced with the weight of their situation, but Lyra's unwavering courage fueled his determination. As they reached the sanctuary's exit, Jack felt a surge of hope. They were not out of danger yet, but they had a plan and, most importantly, each other. Together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead. Jack and Lyra burst out of the sanctuary's exit, the cool night air a stark contrast to the stifling tension inside. The stars above provided a small measure of comfort, but the urgency of their situation left no room for admiration. "Where to now?" Jack asked, his voice low but firm. Lyra pointed towards a dense forest on the horizon. "There's a hidden valley beyond those trees. We can regroup there." They moved quickly, the sounds of pursuit echoing faintly behind them. Every step through the thick underbrush was a reminder of the stakes. Jack's mind raced, formulating plans and contingencies, each step a beat in the rhythm of their escape. As they reached the forest's edge, Jack slowed, scanning the surroundings. The forest was dense, shadows dancing under the canopy of leaves. They slipped inside, the foliage providing a much-needed cover. The cool, earthy scent of the forest filled Jack's senses, grounding him. "We need to stay silent," he whispered, his breath visible in the night air. Lyra nodded, her eyes wide but resolute. They navigated the twisted paths, each rustle and snap underfoot setting their nerves on edge. The tension was palpable, every heartbeat a countdown. After what felt like hours, they emerged into a moonlit clearing, the hidden valley spreading out before them. It was a stark contrast to the chaos they had left behind, a sanctuary of its own. Jack exhaled a sigh of relief. "We should be safe here for a moment." Lyra sank to the ground, her exhaustion evident. "What now?" Jack knelt beside her, his mind already working. "We need to signal for help. My ship's beacon might still work if we can get a high enough vantage point." Lyra nodded, determination sparking in her eyes. "There's a ridge nearby. It's the highest point around." They set off again, moving with renewed purpose. The climb was steep, the terrain rugged and unforgiving, but they pushed through, driven by the hope of rescue. At the top, Jack set up the beacon, its faint blue light piercing the darkness. "Now we wait," Jack said, sinking to the ground beside Lyra, "and hope someone's listening." Minutes stretched into agonizing hours. They took turns keeping watch, the forest around them a symphony of night sounds. Jack's thoughts drifted to Earth, to the life he had left behind. He looked at Lyra, her small frame huddled against the cold, and knew he had found a new purpose. Suddenly, the beacon flickered, a response signal blinking back. Jack's heart leapt. "We've got a signal." Lyra's eyes sparkled with hope. "Will they come?" "They will," Jack assured her, pulling her close. "We just have to hold on a bit longer." Their relief was short-lived. The sound of approaching footsteps shattered the quiet, Zoker's soldiers closing in. Jack's muscles tensed, his mind racing for a plan. "Get behind me," he whispered to Lyra, picking up a makeshift weapon. "We'll fight them off until help arrives." The first soldier appeared, a silhouette against the moonlight. Jack swung with all his strength, the impact reverberating up his arm. The soldier fell, but more followed. Each clash was a test of their resolve, each breath a testament to their determination. As the fight raged on, the sky above them lit up. A ship descended, its lights piercing the night. The roar of its engines drowned out the sounds of battle. Reinforcements poured out, driving Zoker's men back. Jack and Lyra stood amidst the chaos, their hearts pounding with the adrenaline of survival. As the last of the soldiers fled, a figure approached them, clad in the uniform of the Galactic Federation. "Are you Jack Mitchell?" the officer asked, his voice authoritative yet kind. Jack nodded, exhaustion finally catching up with him. "Yes, and this is Lyra. We need to get her to safety." The officer nodded, signaling his men. "You're safe now. We'll take you both to the fleet." As they boarded the ship, Jack looked back at the valley, a sense of bittersweet victory washing over him. They had fought for their survival and won, but the journey had changed them forever. Lyra squeezed his hand, her eyes reflecting a mixture of relief and gratitude. "Thank you, Jack, for everything." He smiled, pulling her into a hug. "We did it together, Lyra. Now let's go home." The ship ascended, carrying them towards a new beginning. The stars above, once distant and cold, now felt like a promise fulfilled. They had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, ready to embrace whatever future awaited them.